The quiet observer. Lila Morgan wiped sweat from her brow as she hefted another bag of feed into her weathered truck. The April sun beat down on Blue Pine Valley, unusually warm for this time of year. Her wildlife rehabilitation sanctuary needed constant attention, especially with spring bringing a fresh wave of orphaned and injured animals. Need a hand with that? Lila turned to find a tall man with deep-set hazel eyes watching her from beside the feed store. Something about him seemed familiar, though she couldn't place it. "I've got it, thanks," she replied, pushing a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "Though if you're offering help, I wouldn't turn down someone loading the last 3 bags." He nodded, moving with quiet efficiency as he loaded the remaining feed. Lila noticed the careful way he handled each bag, methodical, almost practiced. "You're new around here," she said. Not a question, but an observation. In Blue Pine Valley, population 2,700, strangers stood out. "Marcus Flynn," he said simply. "Moved in about a month ago. Cabin up near Whitewater Ridge. Lila Morgan. I run the wildlife sanctuary about 5 miles north of town." His eyes flickered with something. Recognition? Before he nodded. "I've heard about your work. Important thing you're doing." Before she could respond, her phone rang. Ellie, her only part-time volunteer, calling about a fawn found abandoned near the hiking trails. Lila thanked Marcus quickly and drove off, thoughts of the quiet stranger fading as she focused on the rescue ahead. 3 days later, during a violent thunderstorm that flooded the sanctuary's lower fields, Lila found herself stranded. The bridge connecting her property to the main road had partially collapsed, leaving her with 20 animals needing care and no way to transport supplies. As she stood in the rain assessing the damage, headlights cut through the darkness. A weathered blue truck pulled up, and Marcus stepped out, rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. "Thought you might need help," he called over the storm's roar. "I brought some supplies, feed, medications, basics from the list the pharmacy had on file for you." Lila stared, speechless. "How did you—" "Small town," he said with a shrug that didn't quite explain anything. "Let me help you get these inside." They worked in tandem, carrying supplies to the sanctuary's main building. Inside, the warm air filled with animal sounds, the chatter of recovering squirrels, the soft hoots of a rehabilitating owl, the restless movements of the fox kits she'd rescued last week. "You've built something special here," Marcus said, his voice soft as he looked around the space, taking in the careful organization of the rehabilitation enclosures. "It's not much, but it's needed," Lila replied, suddenly self-conscious of the sanctuary's worn floors and patched walls. "The animals don't care about appearances." As they sorted supplies, Lila found herself studying Marcus's face, the small scar above his right eyebrow, the careful way his eyes scanned each room, the tension he carried in his shoulders. "What brought you to Blue Pine Valley?" she asked. "Not many people choose to move here, especially not alone." Something flickered across his features. Caution, perhaps. "Needed peace and quiet," he said simply. "Spent too long in places that had neither." Later that night, after Marcus had helped repair the worst of the storm damage and left with a quiet promise to return the next day, Lila stood at her window watching his truck navigate the muddy road. There was something about Marcus Flynn, something in the way he'd appeared exactly when she needed help, in how he seemed to anticipate what she needed before she asked. As lightning illuminated the valley below, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the first time Marcus had been watching over her sanctuary, or over her unexpected allies. The sanctuary's needs grew as spring fully blossomed across Blue Pine Valley. With each passing day, Lila found herself increasingly grateful for Marcus's steady presence. What began as occasional help had evolved into a near-daily routine. He would arrive at dawn, thermos of coffee in hand, ready to tackle whatever the day required. "You don't have to keep coming," Lila mentioned one morning as they constructed a new enclosure for a recovering bobcat. "I'm sure you have better things to do with your time." Marcus hammered a nail with precision, his movements economical and practiced. "I don't mind the work," he said. "Actually find it peaceful here." Lila watched him work, the way his strong hands handled tools with surprising gentleness. The same hands she'd seen carefully feeding an orphaned fawn the previous week, patience radiating from every gesture. "What did you do before Blue Pine Valley?" she asked, passing him another board. That familiar tension returned to his shoulders. "Security work," he answered after a pause. "Private sector. Nothing interesting." "Must have been something to make you leave it behind for this," she gestured to the surrounding mountains. His eyes met hers briefly, then returned to his task. "Sometimes you just know when it's time for a change." Their days settled into a comfortable rhythm. Marcus fixed fences, built enclosures, and handled the heavier tasks. Lila marveled at his knowledge of the property, how he seemed to intuit where reinforcements were needed, which areas were vulnerable to predators, which enclosures could be improved. One evening, as sunset painted the sanctuary in amber light, they sat on the porch sharing a simple meal. A comfortable silence stretched between them until Lila broke it. "I feel like I've known you longer than a few weeks," she admitted, studying his profile. Marcus's hand paused midair, his water glass hovering near his lips. "What makes you say that?" "Just a feeling. Like you understand this place. Understand me. In a way most people don't bother to try." Something gentle crossed his face, softening the usual vigilance in his eyes. "Maybe some people are just easy to read." A call interrupted them. Another rescue, this time a bald eagle with an injured wing found near the lake. Marcus immediately offered to drive, and within minutes, they were heading toward the coordinates. As they navigated the winding road in darkness, Lila noticed how Marcus's eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, how his hand occasionally drifted toward the glove compartment. The movements seemed automatic, ingrained. When they arrived, they found not just an injured eagle, but two men with suspicious equipment that looked more suited for trapping than hiking. The men seemed startled by their arrival, quickly packing up and leaving after making flimsy excuses. As Lila carefully collected the injured eagle, she noticed Marcus photographing the men's truck as it pulled away, his posture alert, almost predatory. "Everything okay?" she asked. His expression shifted back to neutral so quickly she almost doubted what she'd seen. "Fine. Let's get this bird back to safety." That night, after the eagle was stabilized, Lila found herself unable to sleep. Through her window, she caught a glimpse of Marcus's truck parked at the edge of her property, his silhouette visible in the moonlight as he seemed to patrol the perimeter. By morning, he was gone, but when he appeared for work, there was a weariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Lila handed him coffee without comment, but the questions multiplied in her mind. The security work he'd mentioned, there was more to it than he was saying. And somehow she suspected it had something to do with her sanctuary, with her. "Marcus," she said finally, "is there something I should know about those men last night?" His eyes met hers, conflict evident within them. For a moment she thought he might tell her the truth, whatever that was. Instead, he shook his head. "Just some poachers, probably. Nothing for you to worry about." But as his hand briefly covered hers, warm and reassuring, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus Flynn was protecting her from something far more dangerous than she realized, and had been doing so long before she ever knew his name. Shadows from the past. The manila folder sat heavy in Marcus's hands as he reviewed its contents for the 100th time. 2 years of surveillance reports, threat assessments, and photographs, all centered around Lila Morgan and her sanctuary. He traced a finger over a photo dated 18 months earlier. Lila, unaware of the camera, releasing a rehabilitated hawk into the wild. The same day, she'd unwittingly photographed members of the Kessler smuggling ring using the remote area of the valley to transport exotic animals and contraband. The same day her life had changed without her knowledge. Marcus closed the folder and hid it beneath the floorboards of his cabin. His assignment had officially ended 6 months ago when the primary members of the ring were arrested. The remaining associates were deemed low risk, unlikely to connect Lila to their downfall. But Marcus couldn't leave. Not when he'd watched her work tirelessly day after day. Not when he'd seen firsthand her dedication to every creature in her care. Not when he'd fallen in love with her from a distance long before he'd ever spoken a word to her. So he'd resigned from Sentinel Security, bought the cabin with his savings, and created a new identity close enough to his real one that he could live with the deception. Close enough to protect her if the need ever arose again. His phone vibrated with an alert from the perimeter sensors he'd installed around the sanctuary. Movement at the east boundary. Probably just deer, but he'd check it anyway. Old habits died hard. When he arrived at the sanctuary that morning, Lila was already treating a red-tailed hawk with a broken wing. Same injury pattern as the eagle last week, she said without looking up. And 3 other birds this month. Too much of a coincidence. Marcus felt a familiar tension knot in his stomach. What are you thinking? Someone's targeting raptors. Maybe those men we saw weren't just random poachers. She finally looked up at him, eyes sharp with determination. I'm going to set up some trail cameras in the eastern forest. If someone's hurting these birds, I want evidence. Alarm coursed through Marcus. The eastern forest bordered property owned by Victor Kessler's brother, a minor player in the smuggling operation who had escaped prosecution. I'll help, he said immediately. In fact, I have some experience with surveillance equipment. A slight furrow appeared between Lila's brows. From your security work? Yes. At least that wasn't a lie. They spent the afternoon positioning cameras in the trees. As Lila climbed a pine to secure a camera with a view of the valley, Marcus spotted movement in the distance, a glint of metal that could have been binoculars or a rifle scope. Lila, he called, keeping his voice deliberately casual. Why don't you let me finish up here? There's a call about an injured deer that just came in. Her eyes lit with concern for the animal, exactly as he'd known they would. I'll head back now. Are you sure you can finish this? Positive, he assured her, already planning how he would investigate the observer once she was safely away. That evening, after confirming his suspicions, someone was indeed watching the sanctuary, Marcus returned to find Lila waiting on the porch, 2 glasses of wine beside her. Thought you might want to celebrate, she said, patting the space next to her. The hawk's responding well to treatment. Something warm unfurled in his chest as he sat beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. The scent of pine and antiseptic clung to her skin, the perfume of her work, her passion. You know, she said after a comfortable silence, sometimes I feel like you're keeping watch over this place. Over me. The accuracy of her statement made his breath catch. What makes you say that? She turned to face him, moonlight illuminating the curve of her cheek. Just the way you look at the horizon sometimes, like you're expecting something. The way you check the locks twice. The way you position yourself between me and strangers when we're in town. Her perception startled him. He'd grown careless, comfortable in her presence, allowing training to surface as instinct. Old habits, he said softly. From the job. What kind of security work teaches those habits, Marcus? The question hung between them, an invitation to truth. Her eyes, clear and trusting, made deception suddenly unbearable. When he didn't immediately answer, Lila's hand found his, her fingers warm and steady. Whatever it is you can tell me. The moment stretched between them, fragile and perfect. Marcus found himself leaning toward her, drawn by something stronger than duty or protection. Their lips met in a kiss that felt like coming home, gentle at first, then deepening with a mutual hunger that had been building for weeks. When they finally parted, breathless, Marcus knew he couldn't maintain the lie any longer. Not with her. Not like this. Lila, he whispered against her hair. There's something I need to tell you. About why I'm really here. But before he could continue, the sound of approaching vehicles cut through the night, and the sanctuary security lights flashed on, illuminating 2 black SUVs coming up the drive. Marcus was on his feet instantly, positioning himself between Lila and the approaching threat, the truth momentarily forgotten as old instincts surged to the surface. Broken trust. Stay behind me, Marcus commanded, his voice transforming from the gentle tone Lila knew into something harder, more authoritative. The SUVs came to a stop, and a tall woman in a tailored suit emerged from the first vehicle. Flynn, she called, stand down. This is an official visit. Lila watched confusion cross Marcus's face before recognition set in. Director Harlow, what are you doing here? The woman approached with measured steps. "We have a situation. Kessler's been spotted in the area." She glanced at Lila. "I see you're still maintaining your cover." "Cover?" Lila repeated, the word settling like ice in her stomach. She stepped away from Marcus. "What is she talking about?" Marcus reached for her, but Lila backed further away. Director Harlow raised an eyebrow. "Miss Morgan, I'm Eleanor Harlow, Director of Operations at Sentinel Security. I believe we should continue this conversation inside." The next hour passed in a blur of revelations. In the sanctuary's small office, Director Harlow laid out the truth with clinical precision. How Lila had accidentally photographed the Kessler smuggling operation during a wildlife release. How the organization had placed Marcus as her covert protector after she received anonymous threats. How he had been officially relieved of duty 6 months ago, but had chosen to remain in position. "You've been lying to me this entire time?" Lila finally asked, her voice hollow as she stared at Marcus. The man she thought she'd known, the man she'd begun to love, suddenly a stranger. "Not about everything," Marcus insisted, desperation edging his voice. "What's between us is built on a foundation of lies," she finished. "You watched me for months without my knowledge? Moved here under false pretenses? Gained my trust while keeping this massive secret?" Director Harlow cleared her throat. "I'll give you two a moment. We need to discuss security protocols given Kessler's return, but that can wait briefly." She stepped outside with her team. In the painful silence that followed, Lila struggled to reconcile the Marcus she knew with this revelation. Every interaction now cast in a different light. His convenient appearances when she needed help, his knowledge of the sanctuary's layout, his protective instincts. "Were you ever going to tell me?" she asked finally. Marcus's eyes held genuine anguish. "I was trying to tell you tonight. That's what I was about to say when they arrived. After months of deception. After I kissed you." The betrayal cut deeper than she could have imagined. "I didn't plan for any of this to happen," he admitted. "The assignment was supposed to be temporary. But then I saw how you work, how you care for every creature that comes through those doors. I couldn't leave, couldn't stop watching over you." His voice dropped. "Couldn't stop falling for you." "Don't," Lila whispered, raising a hand to stop him. "You don't get to romanticize this. You invaded my privacy, Marcus. You made me believe in something that wasn't real." "It is real," he insisted. "Everything between us these past weeks has been real." Lila shook her head, tears threatening. "I need you to leave. All of you. I need space to process this." "Lila, Kessler is dangerous. Go, Marcus," she said firmly. "You've done your job. I release you from whatever obligation you think you have to me." When Director Harlow returned, Lila insisted they remove all surveillance equipment from her property. After extracting a promise that they would alert local authorities about the potential threat, she watched them leave, Marcus's devastated expression the last thing she saw before closing the door. Alone in the sanctuary, surrounded by the animals she'd dedicated her life to saving, Lila finally allowed herself to break down. The tears came not just for the deception, but for what might have been. The connection she'd felt with Marcus had been real, at least on her side. Later that night, as she made her rounds checking on the animals, she paused at the bobcat enclosure they had built together. Every nail, every board held the memory of their conversations, their growing closeness. Outside her bedroom window, the forest stood dark and silent where Marcus's truck would normally be parked, keeping watch. For the first time in months, though she hadn't known it until tonight, Lila was truly alone. And somehow, despite the betrayal, that knowledge brought no comfort. Choosing protection. 3 days of silence stretched like an eternity. Lila threw herself into her work, trying to ignore the absence of Marcus's steady presence, the way her eyes still searched the tree line for his truck. The sanctuary felt emptier, the tasks heavier without his help. On the 4th morning, while treating a young raccoon with an infected paw, she heard unfamiliar footsteps on the gravel path. Not Marcus's measured tread, but something furtive, deliberate. Through the window, she spotted a man she didn't recognize examining the perimeter of the property. Something about his methodical movements sent alarm bells ringing in her mind. Moving quietly, Lila secured the raccoon and reached for her phone. As she dialed the sheriff's office, a sharp crack split the air, the sound of the back door being forced open. Lila's heart hammered against her ribs as she slipped into the supply closet, phone clutched to her ear. The dispatcher's voice seemed impossibly distant as she whispered her situation. "Help is on the way, Ms. Morgan," the dispatcher assured her. "Stay hidden." Heavy footsteps moved through the sanctuary. Through the slats in the closet door, Lila caught glimpses of a tall man with cold eyes examining her office, rifling through papers, checking her computer. "Where are those photos, Morgan?" he muttered to himself. "I know you still have them, photos." The wildlife release from 2 years ago, she barely remembered taking pictures that day, let alone what might have been in them. Had she inadvertently captured something important, something worth breaking into her sanctuary for? A sudden commotion outside drew the intruder's attention, the sound of a vehicle approaching fast, tires skidding on gravel. Lila's heart leapt with hope, then fear. The sheriff's department couldn't have responded so quickly. The intruder cursed, drawing a gun from his jacket as he moved toward the window. "Kessler!" A familiar voice called from outside. "Marcus. The property is surrounded. Sentinel agents have positioned themselves in the woods. Walk out now, hands visible." Kessler laughed. "You're bluffing, Flynn. I know you're operating solo now. Playing house with the wildlife lady." He glanced around the room. "Where is she, anyway? I just want those photos and any copies she made. No one needs to get hurt." Lila's mind raced. The photos must be on her old laptop, stored somewhere in the sanctuary's cluttered storage room. Photos she'd never thought twice about, until now. A movement at the window caught her eye. Marcus, signaling to her. Their eyes met across the room, and in that moment, all the hurt and betrayal faded against the immediate danger. Marcus pointed to himself, then to the side door, then held up 3 fingers. A countdown. Lila understood with surprising clarity. She nodded once. When Marcus's countdown reached 0, Lila burst from the closet, creating a distraction as she darted toward the back of the sanctuary. Kessler pivoted, raising his gun, but Marcus was already through the side door, tackling him with the precision of someone who'd done this before. They struggled, the gun discharging once into the ceiling before Marcus knocked it from Kessler's hand. Lila lunged for it, securing the weapon as Marcus subdued Kessler with practiced efficiency. "Zip ties in my right pocket," Marcus directed her, his breath coming hard as he pinned the larger man. "And call Director Harlow, numbers in my phone, later." After Sentinel agents had taken Kessler into custody and the sheriff had taken statements, Lila and Marcus found themselves alone on the sanctuary porch. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the property they'd tended together. "You came back," Lila said finally, breaking the silence. "I never really left," Marcus admitted. "I've been watching the property. When my sources said Kessler was looking for the original photos you took, I knew he'd come here eventually." "So you were still protecting me, still on duty?" Marcus shook his head, meeting her eyes with unwavering intensity. "Not on duty, Lila, not for a long time. I was here because I couldn't bear the thought of anything happening to you." He swallowed hard. "I understand if you can't forgive the deception, but please don't doubt that what grew between us was real, at least for me." Lila studied him, the man who had lied about his purpose, but never about his character. The man who had protected her from shadows she hadn't known existed. The man who had looked at her with such genuine warmth that even now, knowing everything, she couldn't doubt the truth of his feelings. "I'm still angry," she said honestly. "What you did, watching me without my knowledge, violated my trust in a fundamental way." "I know," he acknowledged, his voice rough with regret, "but," she continued, stepping closer, "I also understand why you did it, and I can't ignore what I feel for you, Marcus. The real you, the one who helped build enclosures, who sat with me during storms, who knows exactly how I take my coffee in the morning." Hope flickered in his eyes. "Where does that leave us?" "At the beginning," Lila said, reaching for his hand, "with no more secrets between us. With you telling me everything, about your work, about what happened 2 years ago, about who you really are." Her fingers intertwined with his. "And then we decide together What comes next? As the sun dipped below the mountains, casting the valley in golden light, Lila and Marcus sat side by side. Hour by hour he shared his story, the real one this time. And as darkness fell, Lila found herself drawing closer to him, the truth between them now a bridge rather than a barrier. In the distance, an owl called, one of the many creatures they had saved together. Its wings spread wide against the star-filled sky, free and whole again, a testament to second chances and healing that comes after broken trust. "I can't promise it will be easy," Lila said softly, her head resting against his shoulder, learning to trust again. Marcus's arm curved protectively around her. "Some things are worth the wait," he murmured. "Some people are worth protecting, even from a distance, even if they never know." But Lila did know now, and in that knowledge, in that difficult truth, she found something unexpected, the foundation for a love built not on deception, but on the choice to protect what matters most, to see with clear eyes, and to choose each other, day after day, in the full light of truth.